If it's Monday, former President Donald Trump is booed at the Libertarian National Convention as he braces for closing arguments in his criminal hush money trial tomorrow in New York, with the jury now poised to begin its deliberations. Plus, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu acknowledges an Israeli strike that killed dozens in a tent camp in Gaza, calling it a, quote, tragic incident as the strike draws global condemnation and new calls for an immediate ceasefire. And severe tornadoes and thunderstorms sweep across the U.S., killing at least 21 people as tens of millions of Americans brace for more extreme weather in the East. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamisha Sendor in Washington on this Memorial Day, where we honor and remember military personnel who have died serving our country. This day also marks the unofficial beginning of summer. And this year, it marks the beginning of a truly unprecedented week in American politics. This week, a jury will deliberate the legal fate of a former president who was also his party's presumptive presidential nominee. Tomorrow, closing arguments are set to begin in former President Trump's criminal hush money trial in Manhattan. We expect Judge Merchan to instruct the jury Wednesday before they begin deliberations on a verdict. Members of the general public are already lining up outside the lower Manhattan courtroom for a chance to witness those historic closing arguments. You are looking at video we shot on Saturday. Guilty or not guilty, the end of this hush money trial will mark the start of a new phase in a presidential campaign that's already been anything but normal. Over the weekend, former President Trump, who was, of course, running as a Republican, spoke at the Libertarian Party's national convention here in Washington. Trump asked libertarians for their support, but he was met by a chorus of boos.
The Libertarian Party should nominate Trump for President of the United States. Whoa. That's nice. That's nice. Only if you want to win. Only if you want to win. Maybe you don't want to win. We must work together. Combine with us. You have to combine with us. We cannot give crooked Joe Biden 4 more years. We cannot give crooked Joe Biden 4 more years.
While Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. both made their pitches at the Libertarian Convention, the nomination went to former Georgia Senate candidate Chase Oliver. And despite asking for the nomination, Trump did not submit the appropriate paperwork to be considered. NBC's Dasha Burns is covering the Trump campaign, and also with us, former Superior Court judge and federal prosecutor Carol Lamb. She is also an NBC News legal analyst. So, Dasha, what was the Trump campaign looking to get out of this speech at the Libertarian Convention? And was Trump and his team surprised by the boos and negative reception?
Well, look, I think that they have been pitching all of these different campaign stops in sort of non-traditional places as his unity tour. You saw him go to the South Bronx. You see them looking at expanding their map to places like Minnesota, to Virginia. They are presenting his visit to the Libertarian Convention as along those lines, trying to reach out to those voters that aren't not interested in looking somewhere else besides President Biden. I don't think that they were expecting that kind of reaction. I mean, I've never seen former President Trump in such a hostile environment. He typically goes towards more friendly crowds, ensures that there are supporters and allies there. But his team is defending that visit as, look, he's not afraid to put himself out there and reach out to people that might not typically look at voting for him, Yamish.
Now, Dasha, he did put himself out there and he asked for that endorsement during his speech, but he didn't actually put his name in for nomination. Can you tell us what the decision was there and what the thinking was there?
Well, he posted a Truth Social about this, saying because he is the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party, that he can't actually do that he can't become the nominee for the Libertarian Party. The rules are really wonky around that, but his Truth Social post begs the question, why did he show up there in the first place? And again, his campaign saying he's got his base on lock, so now he's not afraid to reach out to other types of voters.
And as you're talking about that, twice last week, as you talk about him reaching out to other voters, twice last week we saw the Trump campaign in what really are unorthodox venues for a Republican. There was the South Bronx gathering, and then there, of course, now there was this Libertarian Convention. Why is the campaign doing events like this instead of more traditional big campaigns that we've seen him in red areas, frankly, in this country?
Well, first of all, he's been tied to the courtroom. He's been stuck in New York for much of the week. That's something that the campaign team has been frustrated by, but they're trying to do what they can with the limits that they have. The other contrast that they're trying to set up, though, is that, look, Trump's base is there. They are ready. They are not leaving him. We have seen that, evidence of that time and time again, Yamiche. So they're saying, look, while Biden is trying to shore up his own base, he's reaching out to Black and Latino voters saying, hey, stick with me, stick with the Democratic Party. Trump is actually able to expand the types of people that he's looking to bring into the Republican Party. And some of the data and polling bears that out.
And as you were talking about the courtroom, we have to, of course, ask about the fact that this is going to be that historic week where we're going to have closing arguments. How is the Trump campaign preparing for life after this hush money trial? Especially, I'm wondering, are there plans, multiple plans for the different ways that this verdict could go?
So, I mean, that's the big question, right? Nobody knows what the verdict is. We've gotten a preview, though, of how the team and how Trump himself intends to message this. I mean, we've seen a slew of Truth Social posts today lashing out at the system, at the judge, at all of the judges that, he has faced in his various legal troubles, at DA Alvin Bragg. I think you can expect, Yamiche, that if the verdict does not go his way, say he's convicted, he will continue to hammer this message that it's a weaponized system. He'll say that this is election interference, which, of course, there's no evidence of. If he's acquitted, though, you could see him going out there saying, hey, I've been vindicated. Look, they threw everything but the kitchen sink at me. And we've already seen this in some of his fundraising emails just over the last 24 hours, where he's asking his voters and his base to support him. He's asking for 1 million responses by midnight to the question, would you still support me if I were arrested? Right? He's trying to dispel the notion that we have seen in some polling that if there were a conviction in this case, that some voters might think twice about voting for him, Yamiche.
Well, fascinating. It's something that we'll be watching all week. Thank you so much, Dasha, for your reporting. And I want to come to you, Carol. Talk to me a bit about the fact that you've, of course, been a judge, you've been a prosecutor. Walk us through the task at hand when you think about the fact that lawyers on both sides now are preparing for closing arguments. What are they really going to try to accomplish in this final stretch?
Right. Well, often closing arguments and jury instructions don't get the kind of attention that I think they really merit. But I'll start with the closing arguments. The closing arguments are different from opening statements. In opening statements, the lawyers are supposed to stick truly to just the facts, what they believe the evidence is going to show, and they're not really supposed to argue what actually happened in the case. But in closing argument, they are allowed to argue. So all this evidence that the jury has heard in little bits and pieces over a long time frame, but not necessarily in chronological order, it is now the duty of the attorneys to put that all into a narrative that makes sense to the jurors. And so if these jurors have really kept an open mind, they are waiting to hear what the closing argument is from both sides and to hear what makes sense to them. New York is a little different from other jurisdictions and from the federal courts. They actually don't have the prosecution argue first. Usually the prosecution argues, then the defense argues, and the prosecution gets a rebuttal argument. But in New York State, the defense goes first, then the prosecution goes, and that is it. That is it for closing arguments.
Well, as you sort of really map out how this is going to go, this trial's been going on for more than a month. The jury, they might not remember everything. I wonder, how important is it in your mind, do you think these closing arguments are to sort of leaving the jury with the last message here?
Right. Well, both sides would actually love to be the side that goes last, the last voice that the jurors hear. And in this case, it will be the prosecution, because the prosecution has the burden of proof. They have a very high burden. You've heard this many times, beyond a reasonable doubt, and they have to get 12 jurors to agree unanimously that the former president is guilty. So the prosecution gets to go second. And what they need to do is they need to tell the jurors which pieces of evidence go to show that the former president is guilty of each charge in the indictment. So they've got to tie those things together for the jurors. The defense, of course, is going to argue that Michael Cohen had no credibility, and if you can't trust him on certain things, and he's an admitted perjurer and liar, you can't trust him on anything that he says. So they're going to try to poke holes in the prosecution's case.
And of course, you've had a lot of experience here. How long do you think jury deliberations could take, and what could impact that timing?
Yeah, jury deliberations can go on for a long time, or they can come back very quickly. It's really sort of a fool's errand to try to predict that. People are very complicated. You've got a couple of lawyers on the jury, which is pretty unusual, and they may help the jury sort of get through a lot of their questions. Jurors may wonder certain things that, and the lawyers on the jury may be able to point them to jury instructions that they weren't focused on when the judge was reading them. Hopefully, the jury instructions will go into the jury with them, but the lawyers should be able to pinpoint answers for the jurors that perhaps a jury without lawyers on it wouldn't be able to find themselves.
Well, thank you so much for your great analysis, Carol Lamb.
Thank you.
And join me now is Democratic pollster Fernand Armandi, and he's also, I should say, a political analyst here at NBC News. And also there's Lanny Chen. He's a fellow at the Hoover Institution and an NBC News contributor as well. So, Lanny, I want to start with you first. We're in uncharted territory here. I mean, the fact that we have a presumptive Republican nominee, of course, that being Donald Trump, on trial. What's the aftermath of this trial look like when you think about what Donald Trump is going to say and do, no matter what the verdict is?
Well, I think the key here is that regardless of the verdict, it's going to be the same message that we've heard from the former president all along, which is that all of this is a wrongful prosecution, that he's in fact innocent of the charges, regardless of what the jury finds. And this is really part of his effort, again, to cast himself as somebody who has been the victim of an illegitimate prosecution. Now, I think that argument obviously carries a lot of purchase with his political base. The big question, Yamiche, is going to be what the impact is going to be on those voters who are persuadable, the independents in the middle, maybe soft Republicans, soft Democrats, who have concerns about the economy, who have concerns about immigration, issues on which we know the former president's going to be campaigning very hard between now and the end of the year. And really a lot of this legal outcome may be baked into people's public impressions of the former president. And really it is going to be a battle for these persuadable voters over the next several months. And the former president's going to have to do what he can to convince them that this prosecution is really no big deal. Whether he can get there or not, that's going to be the big open question.
And Fernand, I mean, Lanny just said this could be all baked, but I wonder if you think, could there be an impact if he ends up running this election, running for president as a convicted felon here?
Well, Yamiche, if you look at it from a polling perspective, that is what 20% of folks who are leaning towards Trump or voting for Trump suggest in study after study, that if he were a convicted felon, that would be enough. That would be a red line that, if crossed, would cause them to reconsider, if not outright withdraw their support for Trump. And we're not going to know the answer to that question, Yamiche, until if and when he is convicted, and then when the public polls start to come in within days or weeks of that event. But I think if you're looking at this from the perspective of the Biden campaign and the DNC, the only conviction that they really are looking for is the conviction on November 5th, when and if the voters reject Donald Trump's run for the presidency, because it could very well be that this trial either results in a non-conviction or some sort of Trump making the case that he was the victim of a weaponized judge and judicial system, which is what has been his unhinged posts over and over again. So I think the question really becomes, will the voters react numerically? Will we see that reflected in the polls? And that will lead up, of course, to the debate on June 27th. And if not, what does the Trump campaign do in response if they do not get convicted? Do they plant that flag and say, see, it was all about going after it and rigging the justice system against me?
And I want to stick with you. I mean, my NBC News colleagues report that the Biden campaign says that they're going to get more aggressive on Trump once this trial is done. What do you think that's going to look like? And do you think that's really a good idea to sort of lean into this?
Well, I'm not so sure it's a good idea to lean into this trial in particular, because whether or not he's convicted in this trial, Donald Trump has done enough disqualifying incidents, both as president in the post-presidential period and even in this campaign. Today, he used Memorial Day, which for him is the day about suckers and losers, to talk about human scum. That's what he did in his message today. So I think it's imperative for the Biden campaign to keep reminding and defining to those voters, especially Amish, the low information voters who have just not tuned in to the political spectacle like all of us junkies here on this show are today, and remind them who this man is, what he says, and what he represents. Trump has spoken on several occasions about being a dictator on day one. He has talked about implementing a brand new radical system in government that would, in essence, do away with the civil service and the guardrails that kept him somewhat in check from 2017 through 2021. And I think if the Biden campaign does that, they're going to be on the better side of that debate.
Well, as you sort of talk about Donald Trump, I want to play a little bit more of what Donald Trump said at the Libertarian Convention. Take a listen.
The Libertarian Party can make a big difference. Together, we can make America freer than ever before for citizens of all backgrounds and all walks of life. We can unleash new hope, optimism, and energy. We can release limited government so that the people can have an unlimited future. United, we will be unstoppable. If we unite, we are unstoppable. I will be a true friend to libertarians in the White House.
So, Lonnie, I want to ask you, what did former President Trump get out of this appearance?
Well, he was communicating a message to libertarians beyond the ones in that room. Obviously, the convention goers themselves, the base of the Libertarian Party, they're not going to be particularly open to the message of supporting or endorsing the representative or the nominee of a different party. I really think the issue was, could he message beyond them to that percentage, again, of voters who might be gettable in a general election, some of whom might self-identify as libertarian. You know, he made some promises to that Libertarian Party convention, that he'd nominate a libertarian to his cabinet, that he would be open to getting input from libertarians throughout the country, that he would be receptive to the message from the Libertarian Party. These are all things I think the hope was not to convince people in that room, because obviously he didn't do that. It was to speak to libertarians and independents beyond that room who, if they did not vote for him or decided to vote for somebody else, might be a large enough margin to sway the vote in key states like Michigan and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and others, where the former president would like to win and would like to do well in order to win the presidency. So this wasn't about the room so much, Amish, as really what was going on beyond the room and the dynamics of what will be a very close race going over the next several months.
It's interesting that you think about it that way, that it's really the dynamics of the race. Hernan, I want to shift to down ballot for a moment. My colleague, Alex Tabbitt, he caught up with Republican Senate candidate Kari Lake over the weekend in Arizona. Here's what she had to say on polling that has her running behind Donald Trump in the state.
I know the Trump supporters are supporters of mine as well. I know that. And I've seen the real good polling, not some of these bogus polls that are meant to try to sway voters, that are partisan polling. I know what the real polling is. It's neck and neck with Ruben Gallego, and President Trump's supporters are also Kari Lake supporters.
So, Ferna, how notable is it that she's wanting to stick so close to Donald Trump when we've seen candidates in 2020 and 2022 try to put some distance between themselves and Donald Trump?
She's hanging on for dear life. If she doesn't, Yamiche, you know that the Republican Party today is a Trump cult. And if you dare try and break or show any daylight between yourself and the former president, he's going to sick his social media base on him in spite, and also go after that person himself. So she has no choice. We saw it also with Nikki Haley last week, where she bent the knee and kissed the ring, as is the expected for anyone in the Republican Party today to do. What I think is interesting about some of that down ballot polling is, in a lot of states, Arizona among them, the Senate candidates on the Democratic side are running even stronger than Joe Biden is. So we might actually see a reverse coattail effect in some of these states, where some of these Senate candidates buck up, if you will, the Biden campaign in those states and make it even harder for the nominees there to win on the Republican side.
Yeah. Lonnie, Punchbowl News talked to some frontline Republicans in your state, in California, and they've really taken a much different tone on Trump than they did in 2020. Are you surprised?
No, I mean, look, I think a lot of the competitive House races in California and Southern California through the central part of the state are going to be competitive in part because you've got districts that are reasonably purple. And it's going to be very, very hard to embrace, I think, former President Trump or, to hew too hard to the other side for any given reason in any given race. So I do think it's going to be important for them to forge their own identities, their own brands as they think about how they're going to be able to beat Democrats in these very competitive seats. The road to the control of the House runs through California. And that makes it a very interesting dynamic in a state that will not be competitive in the presidential. But certainly these candidates are going to be thinking about ways to navigate that dynamic going into the November election cycle.
Yeah, well, thank you both for joining us on this Memorial Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up, renewed pressure on Israel and the White House today after an Israeli airstrike kills dozens in southern Gaza in an area where Palestinian civilians were sheltering in a tent camp. Plus, exclusive reporting from Taiwan, where a bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers just met with Taiwan's newly inaugurated president after a series of provocative Chinese military drills. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Israel is facing new backlash for a deadly strike on a tent camp in Rafah. Today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the strike, calling it tragic and using a word in Hebrew that could mean mistake or mishap. When asked for clarification, the Israeli government said Netanyahu called it a tragic incident. As you can see here, video of the area where many displaced Palestinians were sheltering engulfed in flames as rescue workers raced to put out the fire. The White House called the images heartbreaking and said it was actively working with Israel's military and others on the ground to figure out what happened. The Hamas-run Ministry of Health says 45 people were killed in the strike, many of them women and children, and more than 200 people were injured. Israel's military says the strike killed 2 senior Hamas officials and that the area targeted was not part of the IDF-declared safe zone. While speaking before Parliament today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will conduct an investigation into the strike. But it comes just days after the UN's highest court ordered Israel to immediately halt its military offensive in Rafah because of the risk to the civilian population. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv with more.
The images coming out of Rafah are causing shock and sparking condemnation all around the world. Here's what we know. Families were sleeping in their tents in the early hours of this morning. Many of these tents made of plastic, made of wood, when this Israeli airstrike came crashing down, and then all hell broke loose, according to survivors speaking to our team in Gaza. They say flames ripped through this tent encampment. Children were screaming. And ultimately, around 40 people killed, according to the emergency services in Hamas-run Gaza. Many of them women and children, some of them apparently burned to death. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in a pretty unusual statement in front of the Israeli parliament, called this a tragic mishap and said Israel will investigate what happened here. The Israeli military says the strike did succeed in killing 2 senior Hamas commanders alleged to have been involved in the planning of attacks in the occupied West Bank. The IDF says it took measures ahead of time to try to reduce civilian casualties, but there is now this operation underway. Now, the White House is saying the images coming out of Rafah are, quote, heartbreaking. They say Israel has the right to pursue Hamas after the October 7th attack, but that it must take every possible precaution to protect Palestinian civilians before launching strikes. We have heard stronger condemnation from President Macron of France and from senior UN officials. And today, those families, many of whom were displaced several times over the course of the war, are picking through the charred remains of what were their tents. And they are moving on, hoping to find safety somewhere else. Back to you.
Raf Sanchez, thank you so much for that reporting. Let me now turn to Ali Rafah, who's at the White House. So, Ali, The White House has raised a number of concerns about Israel's military operations in Rafah. How is the administration reacting to this latest strike? And do we anticipate any sort of repercussions because of this latest incident?
Yeah, Yamiche, well, that's the big question looming over all of this, especially because we know that this has been and is the White House's worst fear, really, since Prime Minister Netanyahu vowed to continue his invasion of Rafah to 100% destroy Hamas, in his words. And the National Security Council, of course, they're saying that the U.S. is working with Israeli officials and partners to investigate what happened. And while they are acknowledging how devastating the images coming out of Rafah are, they are once again stressing Israel's right to defend itself and go after Hamas, which is what Israel is saying it was doing when conducting this strike. But overall, Yamiche, this is really a reflection. The response and the reaction that we've seen from the White House is really a reflection of how delicate of a position this administration has been in since Israel began its ground invasion of Rafah. Because remember, the president has said that any ground invasion of Rafah without a robust plan to relocate the more than 1 million Palestinians who had been sheltering there, many of them now displaced, the White House would not support that move by Israel. He said that would be a red line for him, and that would force him to reconsider future U.S. military support for Israel. And even after we saw Israel began what the White House called targeted and specific strikes away from population centers in Gaza, the White House was still supporting those moves. So whether this is enough to move the needle, this strike on a population center, on an area of Rafah that was designated a safe zone by Israel, whether that is enough to move the needle on future weapons shipments, any pauses of those, is still remains to be seen, Yamiche.
And there's also, of course, this issue of the ceasefire talks, which were supposed to be resuming next week. How much of this incident do you think this incident might impact and complicate those efforts when you think about the fact that there are now more civilians that have been killed?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another big question here. And I've spoken with White House officials about this. They say that as of right now, the plan is still for those talks to continue after we saw meetings over the weekend in Europe between the CIA director and Qatari and Israeli officials make some progress. The White House saying that the plan as of right now is to build on that progress to be able to reach some sort of agreement. But the question really remains whether Hamas is going to be willing or whether they will be really inhibited from agreeing to any sort of proposal because of this latest strike, Yamiche.
Yeah, a lot of questions. Well, Ali Rafah at the White House, thank you so much. And up next, tens of millions of Americans are still facing severe weather threats as a deadly storm system turns further north. And now a new warning that the U.S. could be in store for a highly active hurricane season. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. This weekend, deadly weather across the country has claimed the lives of at least 21 people. Tens of millions of Americans remain under severe weather warnings this Memorial Day. Dozens of tornadoes have been reported across the middle of the country, including near Dawson Springs, Kentucky, where this video of a massive funnel cloud was caught. The White House says President Biden spoke with governors of the states affected by tornadoes. The storms have left a trail of destruction in their path. Widespread damage was seen stretching from Texas and Oklahoma up to Arkansas and Kentucky. And this was a terrifying aftermath from Valley View, Texas, where a tornado tore through a gas station. Officials say 125 people were sheltering there and everyone inside survived. Meanwhile, on the East Coast, government forecasters are predicting an unusually active hurricane season in the Atlantic. That's thanks to La Nina conditions and warming oceans, driven in part by human-caused climate change. Joining me now is Jeva Lange, a founding staff writer at Heatmap. Also with me, former FEMA administrator Craig Fugate. Thank you both for being here. Jeva, I want to go to you first. Put the science of this announcement into context. You have La Nina on one hand, climate change on the other, and then there's now this warming from forecasters. How should people be looking at this upcoming storm season?
Yeah, that's a great question. The word NOAA keeps using is extraordinary. This is really a case of everything kind of going wrong at exactly the same time. So as you were speaking to, we've got the waning El Nino, the incoming La Nina, and that is what allows the wind conditions for hurricanes to form. And then this super, super hot Atlantic Ocean right now that we're seeing. That's caused for a number of different, that's caused by a number of different things. But one of them, as you alluded to, is greenhouse gases. The use of aerosol sulfates are not as prevalent in the atmosphere anymore. And there's some other things like a volcanic eruption that might be causing that record heat, but it is late May right now, and the temperatures we're seeing are similar to what we would expect in August. So it is very, very warm, and that is Red Bull for hurricanes.
I mean, as you say, we're now feeling August temperatures. How has climate change impacted how we view the threat of hurricanes?
Great question. It's a little bit complicated. So we don't see more hurricanes because of climate change, but we do see more intense hurricanes because of climate change. So these really high numbers that NOAA is giving us, those are, again, because of like these multiple atmospheric conditions that are just all aligning at the wrong time right now. But what we can expect because of climate change is these storms to intensify a lot faster and be a lot stronger and a lot wetter. And it's the wet that really causes problems when it comes to loss of human life and damage.
As someone who grew up in Miami, you talked about this in your article, and I thought it was really important. You say that there are people that sort of feel far away enough from the coast that maybe they aren't worried or paying attention to these. But with wetter storms, is that really that danger to people inland? Does it really increase? And how should people be thinking about this, even if you're not on a beachfront?
I'm so glad you brought that up because that is so, so important. Hurricanes are not just coastal events, even though they might seem that way in the popular imagination. We see the effects of flooding far inland. It could sometimes be 100 miles or more inland that we see the flooding from hurricanes. And then also areas that are not traditionally thought of as being hurricane locations. So people in New York, people in Massachusetts, people in New Jersey should also be paying attention to the hurricane forecast this year. The flooding is really where we see loss of life from hurricanes. So that can happen very far inland.
And if people are hearing this and thinking, well, I'm inland and I'm worried about this forecast, how should people be preparing regardless of where they are? What are some of the top things people should be ready for, Jeva?
Yeah, another great question. I would say everybody should know what their flood zone is. Look, these events are so local, and the conditions really depend on the place that you are living. So follow those local alerts. These people know what they're doing. Check out your ready.gov. It's a cliche to just say prepare, but last year was a pretty quiet year, and there's people who might have moved into these regions who don't have a preparedness kits ready. So ready.gov and know your flood zones. Those are the two things I would say everybody should get done today.
Very, very important information as we think about this. Now, Craig, I want to come to you because Jeva just walked us through what individuals can really be doing to prepare. What kind of preparations are underway at organizations like FEMA? And when you think about the fact that the U.S. is getting all these forecasts and all of this warnings are really coming from NOAA?
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example. 2010, NOAA said we're going to have an extremely active season, and President Obama asked me what FEMA was doing differently. I said nothing. We get ready for every hurricane season because we don't know where the landfalls are going to be. And I think that's the key thing. These forecasts bring a lot of attention to the science, and it helps educate people on the risk. But for governments, they have to get ready. We don't know who's going to get hit. We don't know how many landfalling hurricanes are going to be. So, you take this with the understanding that even in a quiet year, we had Hurricane Andrew. So, I was there in 2004 in Florida. We hit by 4 hurricanes. 2005, we had additional hurricanes. 2017, we had multiple landfalling hurricanes from Puerto Rico to Texas. And I think that's one of the lessons we've learned is it's not just going to be one storm that's likely to make landfall. So particularly for FEMA, it's important to, that they have to be flexible, that you don't get just one big disaster and then everything stops. They can come back to back like we saw 2004, 2005, and 2017.
Goodness, when you said Hurricane Andrew, it brought back memories for me of wading through my own living room as a little girl when Hurricane Andrew hit and when I was living in Miami. That being said, not all bouts of weather can be directly linked to climate change. So I want to shift and talk a little bit about the system and whether or not it can be reaching its breaking point when we have seen climate-driven events like the ones we've seen in more recent years.
Well, we already know one system's broken. That's the insurance industry. They're not able to insure these risks. Increasingly in Florida and other parts of the country, climate-driven weather hazards are becoming uninsurable. The other thing we're seeing is as these storms hit, we're seeing a significant impact on workforce housing. People after these storms, the gentrification that takes place, are usually priced out of living in their own communities. We're seeing this to renters, we're seeing this to homeowners. And I think this is the thing we're not really paying attention to is the number of homes we lose in these disasters that don't come back, and the price of housing escalates so fast that many people can no longer afford to live in their communities after these storms.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. Do you think we're going to see an increase in climate-driven migration because of what you just mentioned, both the gentrification but also the insurance issues?
We already see it. In Florida, you saw what happened on the east coast of Florida. We've seen it on the west coast. What was affordable middle-class housing, people are increasingly having to move inland, displacing farm workers from their homes. Other parts of the country, it's getting so bad that many industries are looking at how to house people, provide housing themselves. So it's already taking place. It's getting worse and it's accelerating. And our current federal programs really don't address the low insurance or lack of insurance, particularly from flooding, which if you don't have a flood insurance policy, you're not covered. And as was pointed out, flooding's taking place in areas that have never seen flooding. In Hurricane Ian, some of the worst flooding was up in Orlando region, in areas that had never flooded. I think that's why people need to understand when we say record-setting flooding, these are generally not things you'll find in the FEMA flood insurance rate maps. These are areas well outside of that area that's flooding, and people too often think, if I'm not in that flood zone, which is not really a flood zone, it's an insurance rate map, I don't have a flood problem. And then they find out rising water is not covered by their homeowner's policy.
Wow. With such important information for people to both know what's going on and also how to prepare themselves. Thank you so much, Jeva Lange and Craig Fugate.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And after the break, China flexing its military muscles with drills off the coast of Taiwan as a group of U.S. lawmakers visit Taipei despite Chinese warnings. We've got an exclusive interview with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in Taiwan as he leads the U.S. delegation there. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. A bipartisan congressional delegation is in Taiwan today, standing side by side with the island's newly inaugurated president, a show of support in the face of an increasingly aggressive Beijing. The visit by U.S. lawmakers comes at a particularly tense time in the region. Taiwan's new president was sworn into office 1 week ago. In response, China carried out 2 days of military drills around the island. During the drills, Taiwan says it tracked more than a dozen Chinese naval vessels and almost 50 warplanes off its coast. Congressman McCaul, chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the leader of that congressional delegation, cited those Chinese military drills as a reason for the U.S. to continue strengthening Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. NBC's Ryan Noble sat down with Chairman McCaul in Taipei for an exclusive one-on-one interview. Take a listen.
The Chinese government sent a very specific message to you. They said, don't come. They even sent you a letter. But you came anyway. Why?
Because we support Taiwan. We support freedom and democracy against dictatorships like the one that's very close to where we're sitting right now. The People's Republic of China has been very aggressive, as you saw, sending a letter warning me not to come here, that it would be in violation of the One China policy. I would argue what they have done is violating One China policy. And then you saw the armada of ships and airplanes, one of the largest ones we've seen, surrounding the island, basically executing their war games and preparing for what they would do in the event of a war, all because of democracy. It's like a protest, a military exercise game to protest democracy because they don't like the fact that President Lai won fair and square in a peaceful way through democracy.
So how concerned should Americans be about this aggression? It seems as though China's doing this on a more regular basis, where they're moving into areas that are controlled by Taiwan. There's this looming threat that seems to exist at all times, but yet they've yet to take that step of a formal invasion. Is that something that is imminent? Is it inevitable? Or do you think it's still something that can be headed off by Taiwan, or in some circumstances just avoid it from happening?
Well, it's something that I think national security experts like myself think about every day. How can we stop war? How can we stop aggression and conflict and war? And deterrence is really the best way to do this. You have to get inside Chairman Xi's head, who wants this reunification, he calls it, of Taiwan. And now, since he did not win the election that you can see he's not happy about, and doing the protests with all the warships, now he has to calibrate, okay, what's my next move here? And his legacy is built into this. I think he thinks he's like Chairman Mao, and he would like to take back the island. But we have to demonstrate that the consequences would be way too severe. The risk would outweigh the advantages and any reward from doing that. And the first thing is, we got to get these weapons in. I signed off on the foreign military sales. I've signed off on 22 weapon systems. In the National Security Supplemental, Congress voted $2 billion of financing for Taiwan to help prepare them and show that deterrence to China that it's not worth invading. So what they need here, not so much land assets like in Ukraine, they need maritime assets. That means sea mines and submarines, anti-ship weapons. They also need better surveillance reconnaissance. And also they would be hit with a barrage of rockets that they would need to be able to stop.
So when you say deterrence, does that also include the possibility that the U.S. would be involved in any level of defense for Taiwan if it were to come to that?
Well, I think that's a calculation that she has to think about. We don't want to draw a red line for China right now, because then that is a red line for them, and that would result in an invasion. So for us, the question would be for the American people, is it in our national security interest to come to the defense of Taiwan if they did not provoke an invasion and they were peaceful, but yet invaded by Chinese, communist China? This is something we think about all the time. My committee, I deal with issues of war and peace. My committee has the power to declare war, but that ultimately is a question for the American people.
And NBC's Ryan Nobles joins me now live from Taipei. So, Ryan, congratulations on the exclusive one-on-one interview. This is the first time U.S. officials are meeting with Taiwan's new president. What were your biggest takeaways from those meetings, and why was it important for these lawmakers to go now, given all the other hotspots around the world?
Well, there's no doubt it's interesting being here, Yamiche, and talking to the people of Taiwan, and then getting an understanding of this relationship and the dynamic between the island and the mainland of China. And from an outsider's perspective, if you live thousands of miles away, which most of us do, you would take these acts of aggression by China, the specific calling out of this American congressional delegation and telling them not to come, as a reason to avoid further conflict. But it's clear that these members of Congress, the government here in Taiwan, believes that it's important to stand up to China, to demonstrate that you're not necessarily afraid of their aggression. And so for this delegation to get those warnings from China to still come is a demonstration that the United States has a firm commitment to Taiwan and their future. And it's not just a commitment that comes with aid, but it also comes with weapons. It comes with military support. It comes with many different facets. And you really get a sense that Taiwan appreciates that they feel a bit more emboldened to stand up to China, because they know not only the U.S., but many other democracy-loving countries around the world have a similar level of respect and support for Taiwan in its ability to self-govern, Yamiche.
And Ryan, as you're talking about that, you said there's a firm commitment here, and you also talked about the future. So, of course, I have to ask, is there any concern in Taiwan that this show of support by the U.S., that it could change if former President Trump were to come back into office?
Yeah, you know, it is so interesting to actually be here. You know, there's nowhere in the world that you can go and escape the specter of Donald Trump. Everyone knows who he is. We went to a flower market, spent the full day there on Sunday. Everyone knew who Donald Trump is. But unlike the United States, where there does appear to be a level of anxiety, both for and against Donald Trump, if he were to win the upcoming presidential election, the feeling here is that that foreign policy is not going to change. And that's something that Chairman McCaul believes as well. Listen to what he had to say.
I don't see a lot of dissension or divisiveness. In fact, if you look at the vote on Taiwan, it was almost unanimous. It was very bipartisan, had the strongest support out of any of them. And I think, again, that sends a strong message. I don't see either two candidates taking a weak position on China when it comes to Taiwan. I mean, the current president said things about supporting Taiwan, and I know that President Trump does as well. And I don't see those policies changing.
So they believe the status quo will occur regardless of what the administration is, and the status quo is what the people of Taiwan strive for. That's what they desire. They're not looking to declare independence anytime soon, but at the same time, they do not want China to attempt to forcefully unify the island with the rest of the country. Yamiche.
Ryan Nobles, thank you so much, live from Taiwan for us.
Thank you.
And still to come, the president pays tribute to America's fallen service members on Memorial Day. Plus, new reporting on how the challenge of fighting childcare is impacting military families. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Freedom has never been guaranteed. Every generation has to earn it, fight for it, defend it in battle between autocracy and democracy, between the greed of a few and the rights of many. It matters. Our democracy is more than just a system of government. It's the very soul of America. It's how we've been able to constantly adapt through the centuries. It's why we've always emerged from every challenge stronger than we went in. And it's how we come together as one nation, united. And just as our fallen heroes have kept the ultimate faith with our country and our democracy, we must keep faith with them.
Welcome back. That was President Biden at Arlington National Cemetery this morning, speaking about the sacrifice of fallen U.S. servicemen and women on this Memorial Day after laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And as all Americans mark this important day to honor those who've died serving our country, NBC News has new reporting on the unique obstacles facing our military families and our military members and their families, particularly when it comes to child care. The Department of Defense is the largest employer-run child care operator in the country. And there are still 9,000 kids on a wait list for military child care centers. Joining me now for more of her reporting is NBC News' Shannon Pettypiece. Now, Shannon, you did a remarkable job writing about the child care obstacles and the real challenges facing military families. What did you hear from families, and why is this happening now? Do you think this is new, or is it getting worse?
Well, I mean, anyone who's looked for child care, particularly in the past couple of years, knows about the struggle it can be. But for military families, that struggle is just particularly acute. They move frequently, every 1 to 2 years, often with just a couple months' notice. And since the pandemic, there has just a shortage of child care workers and providers, which means there's often months-long wait lists to get into these child care centers. And it's just a timeline that doesn't work for military families. Oftentimes, they're also stationed in places with limited child care options. And then there's just the expense of child care on a military salary. At the same time, the Defense Department does provide military child care on its bases. But like every child care center, those places have been struggling to hire workers as well, meaning you have thousands of kids on these wait lists. So all of that is creating a lot of emotional and financial strain on military families. And I talked to Kathy Ross Duquette, who runs Blue Star Families. It's an advocacy group for military families. Here's what she said she's been hearing and seeing. Have a listen.
What we're finding in America right now is that we need 2 incomes. We can't get those 2 incomes. The families are suffering. There are service members working 2 jobs. spouses who cannot get jobs. And the number one reason they tell us they can't get those jobs is lack of childcare.
And she told me that in a survey her group did, they found that a third of military spouses said they can't find the childcare needed in order for them to work. So it's just becoming a large strain on these families.
I mean, I empathize with them so much as someone with an 11-month-old who has also gone through the child care sort of search wheel. I wonder what resources is the military, the federal government putting toward helping these families in particular?
So I talked to the Defense Department, to the Army. They said they are trying to recruit more child care workers because that's one of the first things they need is more people to get more kids off that wait list. But it's just a competitive job market. They're not only competing with other child care centers, but with public schools, even in some places with fast food employers who are paying $18 an hour. So it's competitive wages. It's a tight labor market. They're trying to offer bonuses and incentives. They do feel like they're seeing some progress, but it's just something that's going to take time.
Well, Shannon Pavis, this is a great article shining a light on a special day, of course, Memorial Day. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. And tomorrow we'll be back with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Tom Costello in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.